Welcome to BooTube Tales, where nightmares get a spotlight. Here are 20 uniquely terrifying neighbor stories you've never heard before, each crafted to challenge your perception of reality while keeping you hooked with bizarre twists and psychological horror. Story 1. The Reverse Aging Neighbor. Let me tell you about something strange that happened in my neighborhood last summer. You know how most people age normally, gradually getting older, developing wrinkles, gray hair, the usual signs of time passing? Well, my neighbor Mr. Thompson was different, very different. I first noticed something was off when I saw him collecting his mail one morning. The week before, he'd had deep wrinkles around his eyes and thin silver hair. But that day, his wrinkles seemed less pronounced and his hair appeared slightly darker. I brushed it off, thinking maybe he'd started using some fancy anti-aging cream or gotten a hair treatment. But it didn't stop there. Week after week, I watched in bewilderment as Mr. Thompson seemed to age backward. His stooped posture straightened, his skin became increasingly smooth, and his hair grew thicker and darker. Nobody else in the neighborhood seemed to notice, or if they did, they didn't say anything. My curiosity turned to concern when I realized his transformation wasn't just subtle anymore. He looked at least 20 years younger than when he'd first moved in. I started paying more attention, watching his house from my living room window in the evenings. Then came that night, the night that still haunts me. It was past midnight, and I noticed his kitchen light was still on. I'm not proud of what I did next, but something compelled me to walk over to his house. Through a gap in his curtains, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Mr. Thompson was standing in front of his bathroom mirror, and he was peeling off his face. Not like a mask or makeup, but like it was his actual skin. Underneath was smooth, fresh skin, the face of a child, innocent and pure. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest, and rushed home. The next morning, I was walking to the coffee shop when I saw it, a missing child poster stapled to a telephone pole. My hands trembled as I looked at the photograph. Staring back at me was the exact same childlike face I'd seen beneath Mr. Thompson's skin the night before. Mr. Thompson disappeared shortly after that. The police investigated his empty house but found nothing unusual. Sometimes on quiet nights, I think about him, where he might be now, whose face he might be wearing. And I wonder how many others like him are out there, shedding their skins, stealing faces, living among us. Just remember, the next time you notice someone looking surprisingly younger, maybe they've found a great skincare routine, or maybe, just maybe, they're wearing someone else's face. Story 2. The Silent Subletters. Have you ever thought about the people living next door to you? I mean, really thought about them? Sarah and Mike hadn't, not until they moved into apartment 4B at Oakwood Heights last September. The neighbors in 4A were different. At first, Sarah and Mike assumed they were just private people. No casual hallway chats, no friendly waves, not even the occasional sound of a TV or footsteps. Just silence, complete and utter silence. But they did communicate, in their own peculiar way. Yellow sticky notes would appear on doors, walls, and sometimes even windows. Please keep noise down or package delivered to office. The handwriting was always the same, neat, precise, almost mechanical. Sarah found it odd but harmless. Mike joked that maybe they were writers or monks who'd taken a vow of silence. They adapted to this strange dynamic, leaving their own notes when necessary. It became a sort of silent dialogue, this paper conversation between neighbors. Then came that winter night. Sarah was grabbing a late-night snack when she saw it, a sticky note on their fridge that wasn't there during dinner. The message made her blood run cold. "We've been dead for 17 years. Your turn soon." Mike called it a sick prank, but Sarah couldn't shake the unease. The next morning, they knocked on 4A's door. No answer. The property manager finally opened it for them after their insistence. The apartment was empty. Not just empty, it looked like no one had lived there for years. Dust covered everything. In the corner, yellowed newspapers were stacked, the newest dated 2006. But there on the wall was a fresh yellow sticky note. "We moved in with you now. They say the mind plays tricks on you, that fear can make you imagine things. But Sarah and Mike swear the air in their apartment feels different now. Sometimes they catch glimpses of movement in mirrors, and every morning, they wake to find their furniture slightly rearranged. The strangest part? They still get those sticky notes. But now, they appear inside their locked apartment. And the handwriting? It's starting to look exactly like their own. Some neighbors are silent because they choose to be. Others are silent because, well, maybe silence is all they have left. I'll leave you with this thought. Next time you hear absolute silence from your neighbors, ask yourself, is it really empty, or is something else filling that void? Story 3. The Shared Sleep Cycle. You know that strange feeling when you can't quite remember if something was a dream or reality? Well, let me tell you about Sarah, who lived in apartment 4B of the Oakwood complex. She was a perfectly normal person, working a 9-to-5 job, until she started noticing something peculiar about her neighbor in 4A. It began with small observations. Every morning at 7:15 when she'd leave for work, she'd see him collecting his mail. Every evening at 6:30 when she'd return, he'd be watering his plants on the balcony. At first, she thought nothing of it, just two people with similar schedules. But then she started working from home, and the pattern became unsettling. If she took a lunch break at 2 p.m., she'd hear his microwave beeping. If she stayed up late watching Netflix, she'd hear his TV too. It was as if their lives were perfectly synchronized, like two dancers performing the same choreography. Sarah began documenting everything. She changed her schedule randomly, took naps at odd hours, even pulled all-nighters just to test her theory. And that's when the truly bizarre thing happened. During those sleepless nights, his apartment remained dark and silent. No movement, no lights, nothing. After weeks of this psychological torture, she finally gathered the courage to confront him. She caught him in the hallway one evening, demanding answers. His response made her blood run cold. Leaning in close, he whispered, "You don't understand. When you sleep, I wake up in your body." Sarah laughed it off as crazy talk, but that night, something made her check her diary. There, in her own handwriting, were entries she had no memory of writing. Detailed accounts of her life, but from someone else's perspective. Stories about walking in her shoes, quite literally, while she slept. Now Sarah lies awake most nights fighting sleep, watching her reflection in the mirror. Sometimes, just sometimes, she swears she sees her eyes blink when she doesn't mean to. And she wonders, when she does finally drift off, who exactly is walking around in her skin? They say we spend 1/3 of our lives sleeping. But now Sarah can't help but wonder, are we really sleeping, or are we just switching places with someone else? Next time you feel unusually tired after a full night's rest, maybe check your diary. You might find something written in your handwriting that you don't remember writing at all. Story 4. The Borrowed Face. Have you ever felt like someone was copying you? Not just your style or mannerisms, but trying to become you? Let me tell you about something that happened in my quiet suburban neighborhood, where the houses all look the same, and the people, well, they're supposed to be different. It started innocently enough. I first noticed Mark, my next-door neighbor, wearing a blue button-down shirt identical to mine one morning. Could have been coincidence, right? We shop at the same stores after all. But then it happened again with my rare vintage leather jacket. And again with my custom-made shoes. At first, I laughed it off. Great minds think alike, I'd tell myself. But then things got strange. One morning as I was getting my mail, I caught a glimpse of Mark. His usually round face seemed somehow sharper. His nose, once bulbous and distinctive, had taken on a more angular shape, like mine. I started avoiding him, but I'd catch him staring through his window, studying me. With each passing week, his transformation became more apparent. His hair changed color gradually, matching my dark brown. His height seemed to adjust, his posture mirroring mine. It was like watching a sculptor slowly reshape clay, except the clay was living flesh. My wife thought I was paranoid. My friends suggested I was working too hard, but I knew what I was seeing. Mark was becoming me, piece by piece, detail by detail. Then came that Tuesday evening. I remember it was Tuesday because I always work late on Tuesdays. I came home, tired and hungry, looking forward to the leftover lasagna in my fridge. The house was quiet. My wife was visiting her sister that week. The kitchen light was on, though I distinctly remembered turning it off that morning. As I walked in, there he was. Mark, sitting at my kitchen table in my favorite chair, wearing my bathrobe. But what made my blood freeze wasn't any of that. It was his face, or rather what remained of it. Because my face, my actual face, was stretched over his like a grotesque mask. The edges were still raw, strips of his original skin hanging loose like peeled wallpaper. He smiled using my lips, my cheeks, my skin. "Welcome home," he said, using my voice perfectly. "I hope you don't mind, but I've decided to borrow this permanently." I never saw my neighbor Mark again after that night. But sometimes, when I look in the mirror now, I swear I can see him looking back at me, wearing my face, living my life. And I wonder, Was I ever really me to begin with? So next time you notice someone copying your style or mimicking your mannerisms, just remember, it might be more than mere flattery. They might be trying on your life for size. Story 5. The Hole in the Floor. Late autumn nights in my old apartment building always felt a bit off, but I could never quite put my finger on why. The creaks and groans of the aging structure were normal enough, and the occasional footsteps from other tenants were just part of apartment living. But something else lingered in the air, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It started with subtle scratching sounds, so faint I thought I was imagining them. They always seemed to come from beneath my bed, usually around 3 a.m. when the world outside was dead quiet. At first I dismissed it as mice. Every old building has them, right? But mice don't scratch with such purpose. The sounds grew more distinct over time. Scraping, deliberate, methodical, like someone or something was trying to reach up through the floor. I told myself I was being paranoid, but each night the scratching seemed to get louder, more desperate. One particularly sleepless night, after hours of that maddening sound, I finally snapped. I threw my blankets aside and dropped to my knees, yanking back the corner of my bedroom carpet. What I found made my blood run cold, a perfectly round hole, about the size of a quarter, drilled clean through the hardwood floor. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and turned on its flashlight. Part of me didn't want to look, but I had to know. As I leaned down to peer through the hole, my heart nearly stopped. There, in the darkness below, was a face, pale and gaunt, staring back at me with eyes wide with terror. But what haunts me most to this day was their mouth, crudely sewn shut with thick, dark thread, silently screaming for help. I scrambled backward, my mind refusing to process what I'd just seen. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my living room, lights blazing, waiting for dawn. When morning finally came, I heard movement downstairs. The sound of furniture being moved, voices I didn't recognize. I ran into my bedroom and lifted the carpet again, but the hole was gone. No trace it had ever existed. Later that day, I saw a new family moving in downstairs, a cheerful couple with 2 kids. They waved hello as they carried in their boxes, seeming perfectly normal. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear scratching. And I can't help but wonder, who else is down there trying to tell their story through a hole in the floor? Story to Misak and the Neighborhood Pact. I never thought moving to Maple Grove would change my life forever. You know that feeling when something seems almost too perfect? That's exactly what I felt when I first drove down Cherry Lane. The houses were beautiful, pristine lawns, white picket fences, and the most striking feature, every single house had the same shade of cobalt blue door. I remember thinking it was charming, like some kind of neighborhood aesthetic choice. The price was right, the location was perfect, and my realtor was practically pushing me to close the deal. "These houses never stay on the market long," she'd said, with an odd glint in her eye. The welcome party was last night. All my new neighbors were there, wearing these pleasant smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Mrs. Thompson from number 23 brought her famous apple pie. Mr. Jenkins from across the street kept talking about how wonderful it was to have new blood in the community. Then came the contract. They presented it so casually, like it was just standard HOA paperwork. "Everyone signs it," they said. "It's tradition." I probably should have read it more carefully, but the wine was flowing and everyone was so insistent. This morning, I woke up to the smell of fresh paint. My door, my beautiful cherry wood door that I'd specially ordered, was now the same cobalt blue as all the others. And there, on my kitchen counter, was the contract I'd signed last night. But now I could see what it really said. "I hereby pledge eternal loyalty to the street." I tried calling Sarah Miller, who'd looked at the house before me but suddenly changed her mind. No answer. The realtor who sold me the house? Her number's disconnected. And old Mrs. Peterson, who lived here before me? According to the neighbors, she moved to Florida, but her car is still in the community garage covered in dust. Now I understand why no one ever leaves Maple Grove. The blue doors aren't just about aesthetics, they're about belonging, about conformity. And those who don't conform, well, let's just say the community has its ways of maintaining harmony. I'm writing this because I don't know how much longer I'll be here. Last night I heard scratching behind my walls. This morning my kitchen knives were rearranged, and the neighbors, they're still smiling, but now they watch me. They watch me constantly. Remember this. If you're ever house hunting and find a street where all the doors are the same color, any color, turn around and drive away. Some neighborhoods aren't just gated communities. They're prisons with pretty facades. Story 7, The 4 a.m. Visitor. I live alone in a modest house on Cherry Street. Nothing unusual about it, really. Well, at least that's what I thought until the whispers began. It was always at 4 a.m. like clockwork. The first time I heard it, I nearly convinced myself it was just the wind playing tricks on my mind. But it wasn't the wind. It was a child's voice, soft and pleading. "Let me in, I'm scared." The kind of voice that makes your heart ache and your skin crawl at the same time. Every single night, same time, same words. I'm not easily spooked, but something about this felt wrong. Really wrong. I installed security cameras, thinking I'd catch some neighborhood kids playing a cruel prank. But the footage showed nothing, absolutely nothing. Just an empty porch and those whispers floating in the darkness. The sleepless nights started piling up. Dark circles formed under my eyes, and my coworkers began asking if I was okay. How could I explain that I was being haunted by a voice that shouldn't exist? Then came last night. Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the exhaustion, or maybe I just couldn't take the mystery anymore. When the whispers started, I did what I'd been afraid to do for weeks. I opened the door. What happened next? God, I still can't process it properly. There was no child, but there was a dog. My neighbor's German shepherd dragging something in its mouth. At first I thought it was just a regular collar, but when I got closer, my blood turned to ice. It was a pink collar with a heart-shaped name tag. My daughter's name tag, my little girl who went missing 3 months ago. And then I saw my neighbor standing at the edge of my property, smiling that terrible smile. "She's happier with us now," they said, voice dripping with something that wasn't quite human. The police are involved now, but I haven't slept since. Because every night at 4 a.m. I still hear that whisper. Only now I know whose voice it is, and I know why she's scared. Sometimes the most terrifying things aren't the unexplained phenomena, they're the horrible truths hiding behind them, right next door, wearing a neighbor's smile. Story 8, The Reflection Glitch. Have you ever caught a glimpse of your reflection and felt something was off? Not quite right? I never used to think twice about these things until I moved to Maple Street last summer. It started with small observations about my neighbor, Sarah. Sweet lady, always tending to her garden in the morning. But one day, while having my coffee by the window, I noticed something peculiar. As Sarah moved past her living room window, her reflection lingered, just for a split second too long. I blinked hard, convinced my mind was playing tricks on me. But it kept happening. Day after day, that slight delay became impossible to ignore. When Sarah waved, her reflection would wave just a moment too late. When she turned, her reflection would turn a heartbeat after. It was like watching a video with slightly mismatched audio. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the angle of the sun, or perhaps my morning coffee hadn't kicked in yet. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Then came that Tuesday morning. I was getting ready for work, applying mascara in my bathroom mirror, when it happened. My reflection winked at me. Not me winking at myself, no, my reflection winked while I stood there frozen in shock. I ran out of my house straight to Sarah's door. She opened it before I could even knock, her face pale and knowing. We sat in her kitchen where she finally told me the truth. "This street," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "it isn't real. None of us are. We're just reflections, echoes of the people who used to live here before the accident." The accident, a gas explosion 5 years ago that took an entire street of lives. But somehow, in this strange intersection between reality and something else, we remained, not as ghosts, but as reflections, living our lives 1 second behind the real world that once was. Now every morning I look in the mirror and wonder, am I the reflection or am I the real thing? And does it even matter anymore? Because in this street of delayed reflections and borrowed time, we found our own kind of reality, even if it moves just a second too slow. Story 9. The Gift Exchange. There's something about the holiday season that makes people more generous, more willing to connect with their neighbors. That's what I used to think anyway. Until last December, when an unexpected gift exchange changed everything. It started innocently enough. I had just moved into my new apartment complex, trying to settle in, getting used to the unfamiliar sounds and faces. The winter darkness settled in early, and most people kept to themselves. Then one evening, I found a small package outside my door. Simple enough, right? Just a friendly neighbor reaching out. The cookies looked delicious, perfectly golden brown with a slight shimmer of sugar on top. I remember thinking how nice it was, this small gesture of kindness. I ate one that night, leaving the other as requested. The cookie was surprisingly crunchy with an unusual taste I couldn't quite place. I went to bed that night feeling content about this little exchange. But when I woke up the next morning, something was terribly wrong. There was a gap in my smile where one of my teeth should have been. I frantically searched my bedsheets, my pillowcase, but the tooth was nowhere to be found. A week passed, and I tried to convince myself it was just a bizarre coincidence. Then another package appeared at my door. This time it was a small jewelry box with a delicate silver necklace inside. But what made my blood run cold was the pendant, my missing tooth, carefully wrapped in silver wire. The note accompanying it was different this time. No more friendly neighborly sentiment. Just 5 words that made my skin crawl. Now we're connected forever. I still live in that apartment. I still check twice before opening my door. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear someone humming in the hallway, the soft clink of metal on tooth echoing in the darkness. The cookie plate was never returned. But sometimes I find sugar crystals scattered outside my door, like breadcrumbs leading to somewhere I never want to go. Because now I know some gifts aren't meant to be exchanges. They're meant to be chains. So the next time a neighbor leaves you a plate of cookies, remember my story, and maybe, just maybe, politely decline. Story 10. The wrong address. Have you ever gotten mail that wasn't meant for you? Usually it's just a minor inconvenience, maybe a pizza flyer for the previous tenant, or a misdelivered package. But sometimes it's something that makes your blood run cold. I've lived in apartment 302 at Cedar Heights for about 3 years now. It's a quiet building, nothing special. The kind of place where you nod to your neighbors in the hallway but don't really know their names. Except for Mrs. Chen in 301, she's been here forever, always bringing me leftover dumplings. Last Tuesday, I found an envelope in my mailbox. The new tenant, apartment 302, it said. I figured it was a mistake. I wasn't new, and I certainly wasn't planning on going anywhere. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. My heart nearly stopped when I saw it. It was me lying in my bed, clearly asleep. The strange part? The timestamp in the corner showed next Wednesday's date. A week in the future. With shaking hands, I went to Mrs. Chen's door. When she opened it, I showed her the photo, asking if she knew anything about it. Her usual warm smile faded. "Oh," she said, her voice unnaturally flat. "That's for the family moving in after you leave." I wanted to ask more questions, but she quickly shut her door. That's when I heard it. The sound of cardboard boxes being dragged across the floor, furniture being moved. Coming from 303. The thing is, 303 has been empty since before I moved in. The building manager always said there were structural issues with that unit. I'm standing in my apartment now, listening to the sounds next door getting louder. The scraping, the dragging, the occasional thump. But that's impossible. There's no one there. There can't be anyone there. The photo sits on my kitchen counter, mocking me. Tomorrow is Wednesday, and I can't help but wonder, will I be here to see if that timestamp is right? Some mail mistakes aren't mistakes at all. Sometimes they're warnings, and sometimes they're promises. Story 11, the nightly redecoration. Have you ever had that strange feeling that something in your home just isn't quite right? Like when you're absolutely certain you left your coffee mug on the kitchen counter, but somehow it ended up by the sink? Most of us brush these things off as forgetfulness or tired minds playing tricks on us. That's exactly what Sarah did at first. It started with minor things. A throw pillow slightly askew, picture frames tilted at different angles, her favorite reading chair seemingly inches from its usual spot. Sarah would shake her head each morning, convincing herself she was just being paranoid. But the changes became more noticeable. The vintage lamp she always kept on the right side of her couch would mysteriously migrate to the left. Her carefully arranged bookshelf would be subtly reorganized, with books grouped by size rather than author. The dining room chairs would be pulled out at slightly different angles than she remembered leaving them. Sarah started taking photos of her apartment before bed, comparing them to how things looked in the morning. The differences were undeniable. That's when she decided to install security cameras throughout her home, hiding them carefully in plants behind picture frames and tucked away in corners. The footage she reviewed the next day made her blood run cold. At exactly 2:47 a.m., her neighbor, a man she'd only exchanged polite nods with in the hallway, picked her lock and entered her apartment. But he wasn't there to steal anything. Instead, he spent hours meticulously adjusting her furniture, measuring distances between objects and repositioning items until everything matched. Something. Trembling, Sarah called the police. When they searched his apartment, they discovered something that still haunts her to this day. His unit was an exact mirror image of hers. The same furniture, the same decorations, even the same family photos. But in every single photograph, where Sarah's face should have been, he had carefully pasted his own. The most disturbing part? He wasn't just copying her home. He was trying to make her life mirror his fabricated reality, one furniture piece at a time. Sometimes the scariest things aren't the monsters under our beds or the shadows in our closets. Sometimes they're the seemingly normal people who live next door, gradually invading our lives in ways so subtle we almost don't notice until it's too late. So tonight, before you go to bed, take a good look around your home. And maybe, just maybe, take a picture of how everything is arranged. You know, just in case. Story 12, The Shared Nightmare. Have you ever experienced a nightmare so vivid, so real, that it stays with you long after you wake up? That's what happened to our quiet suburban street last summer, but this wasn't just any ordinary bad dream. It started with Mrs. Henderson at number 23. She mentioned it over coffee one morning. A dark figure, methodically digging in her yard under the pale moonlight. The Thompsons at number 27, the elderly Patels at number 25, even young Sarah who lived alone at number 29, all describing the same haunting scene. A tall, shadowy figure, wearing what looked like old-fashioned work clothes, digging holes in their yards at midnight. The strange thing? Everyone had this dream on the third night of every month. We thought we were all just feeding into each other's paranoia until someone noticed something that made our blood run cold. The morning after each shared nightmare, small mounds of freshly turned earth would appear in our yards. At first they seemed random, but when viewed from above, they formed a perfect line. A line that grew longer with each passing month, advancing house by house, yard by yard. We followed the pattern, measuring the distance between mounds, calculating the trajectory. That's when we realized all the lines pointed to one place, the old Victorian house at the end of our street. Number 33, the house that had stood empty for decades, its windows like dark eyes watching our neighborhood. Local records showed that the house's original owner disappeared mysteriously in 1932. He was a gravedigger by trade. The police never found him, but according to legend, he'd been secretly burying something valuable in yards across town. Now every third night we lie awake, wondering if tonight's the night the figure will reach its final destination. What will it unearth from the yard of number 33? Some say we should stop it. Others say we should let the past rest. But deep down we all know some secrets are meant to stay buried. As I write this, it's the second night of the month. Tomorrow night, we'll all share that nightmare again. And somewhere in our street, fresh dirt will tell us we're one step closer to discovering what that ghostly gravedigger has been searching for all these years. Story 13, The Borrowed Time. It slips through our fingers like grains of sand, doesn't it? But what if I told you about someone who tried to cheat death by borrowing time? In a quiet neighborhood, there lived a man, let's call him James, who received the worst news anyone could get. Terminal illness, 6 months to live, the doctor said. 6 months to say goodbye to his teenage son, to wrap up a life barely lived. But James wasn't ready to go. Who would take care of his son? Who would see him graduate, get married, have children of his own? That's when desperation led him to make an unusual deal with his neighbor, Mr. Peterson. "Take 1 hour of my life each day," James proposed, his voice trembling, "and in return, let me live longer." Mr. Peterson, an elderly man who had lived alone for decades, agreed with surprising eagerness. Perhaps too much eagerness. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The miracle happened. James got better. His color returned, his strength grew, and doctors were baffled by his recovery. But something strange was happening next door. Mr. Peterson was aging rapidly, his hair whitening, his skin wrinkling, his back hunching more with each passing month. A year went by, and James was thriving, living life to the fullest. But then Mr. Peterson disappeared without a trace. Just vanished. The police investigated but found nothing. Life moved on. Until one morning, James noticed something terrifying. His son, who had just celebrated his 18th birthday, looked different. Gray streaks appeared in his hair overnight. Wrinkles formed around his eyes. Within weeks, his teenage son looked like a man in his 40s. That's when James realized the horrible truth. Time isn't something you can borrow. It's something you can only steal. And the universe always collects its debts, not just from you, but from those you love the most. They say time is our most precious resource because we never know how much we have left. But perhaps what's more important is how we use the time we're given, rather than trying to steal more of it. As for James, well, he's still out there somewhere living on borrowed time. But at what cost? Sometimes the price of more time isn't worth the toll it takes on those we love the most. Remember, we can't control how much time we have, but we can control what we do with every precious moment we're given. That's the real gift of time. Not its quantity, but its quality. Story 14. The Locked Roommate. You know what's been keeping me up at night lately? This bizarre situation with my next-door neighbor. I've lived in this apartment complex for about 3 years now, and everything was perfectly normal until last month when this new guy moved in next door. The first time I met him, he seemed friendly enough. We did the usual neighbor small talk, where you're from, what you do, that kind of thing. But then he mentioned something strange. He said, "Oh, and there's my roommate too, but you probably won't see him much." He's really shy. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, some people are introverts, right? But here's the weird part. I never heard two voices next door. Never saw anyone else coming or going. Just this one guy. Then, last Tuesday night, everything changed. I was up late scrolling through my phone in bed when I heard it. This thumping sound, not like footsteps, more like something being dragged across the floor. It was coming from the other side of my bedroom wall, the wall I share with my neighbor's apartment. I froze, just listening, when suddenly I saw it. Near the bottom of the wall, where there's this tiny gap between the baseboard and the carpet, a hand slipped through. Not a normal hand, this was pale. Too pale, like it had never seen sunlight. The fingers were long and thin, almost spider-like, and they seemed to be reaching for something. I nearly fell out of my bed trying to get away from that wall. I didn't sleep that night, how could I? The next morning, I ran into my neighbor in the hallway. Before I could say anything, he looked at me with this unsettling smile and said, "You weren't supposed to see him. Now he's interested in you." My blood ran cold. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but I couldn't find my voice. I just rushed back to my apartment and locked the door. That night, God, I can barely talk about it. I was lying in bed trying to convince myself it was all in my head when I heard it. That sound that makes every hair on your body stand up. The slow, deliberate creak of my closet door opening from the inside. You know what the worst part is? I'm still here in this apartment, and every night I stare at that closet door, wondering if it's going to open again. Because now I know, whatever that thing is, it doesn't need doors or walls to get where it wants to go. And apparently, it wants to get to me. Story 15. The Neighborhood Watch. Growing up, I always thought neighborhood watch groups were about looking out for each other. You know, keeping an eye out for actual crime, making sure everyone's safe. That's why when I moved into Maple Grove last month, I didn't think twice about joining the community group chat. It started innocently enough. Messages about suspicious cars, warnings about door-to-door salespeople, the usual stuff. People weren't just reporting break-ins or vandalism. They were tracking specific individuals with disturbing precision. Woman in blue coat walking down Oak Street, 3:42 p.m. No shopping bags visible. Second time this week. Man with black hat stood at bus stop for 17 minutes. Normal wait time is 12 minutes. I brushed it off at first. People are just being cautious, right? That's what I told myself until I saw my own description pop up in the chat. New resident spotted at grocery store. Purchased unusual quantities of canned goods. Possible prepper? Then it got worse. They documented every time I left my house, every person I talked to, even what time I turned my lights off at night. The notifications became more frequent, more detailed. I tried to leave the group, but somehow I couldn't. Yesterday, I made the mistake of driving to the next town over. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. Subject has deviated from approved travel patterns. Possible flight risk. Zone violation confirmed. The final message made my blood run cold. Subject has left the approved zone. Initiate retrieval. I'm sitting here now, listening to my doorbell ring. Through my security camera, I can see them. Every single neighbor on my street. Their faces are eerily calm, illuminated by porch lights. Some are holding ropes, others have duct tape. They don't look like monsters. They look like normal people. The same ones who wave hello every morning, who share gardening tips and cookie recipes. But now they're waiting, watching, ready to ensure no one breaks the unwritten rules of their perfect little community. The scariest part, I'm starting to wonder how many other neighborhoods are just like this one. How many other watch groups have evolved into something far more sinister than anyone could have imagined? The doorbell rings again and again and again. Story 16. The Vanishing Pets. I used to think the scariest things in life were the monsters under our beds or the shadows that dance across our walls at night. But sometimes the most terrifying things come from the places we least expect, like the house next door. It started with Mrs. Johnson's Persian cat, then the Hendersons' golden retriever. One by one, pets began vanishing from our quiet suburban neighborhood. At first, we all assumed they'd just wandered off. You know how animals can be. But when my own cat, Shadow, disappeared, something didn't feel right. I couldn't sleep that night. The silence in my house was deafening without Shadow's gentle purring. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I set up a security camera facing my backyard, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever was happening to our beloved pets. What I saw the next morning made my blood run cold. There was Mr. Peters, my neighbor of 15 years, the same man who brought me Christmas cookies and helped me fix my fence last summer. He was standing in my yard at 3 a.m. making these soft clicking sounds with his tongue, holding something that glinted in the moonlight. Shadow appeared and before I could do anything, followed him into his garage. I confronted him immediately. The garage door was open when I arrived, and what I saw inside, I still have trouble believing it. Workbenches lined with circuit boards, mechanical parts, and pets. But they weren't real pets. They were perfect robotic replicas, down to the last whisker and tail twitch. When Mr. Peters saw me, he didn't run. He didn't try to hide it. He just broke down. Through his sobs, he told me about his dog, Max, who died 3 years ago. "I just couldn't let go," he whispered. "Don't you want yours to live forever?" I backed away, disturbed but somewhat relieved. At least the animals weren't being harmed, right? I thought maybe I could help him get professional help, return the pets to their owners. Everything would be okay. Then Shadow came home the next day. My beautiful cat looked the same, felt the same, purred the same. But those eyes, those mechanical eyes that blinked in perfect synchronization with Mr. Peters' movements when he walked past my house that evening. Now I lie awake at night listening to Shadow's purring. It's perfectly timed, never missing a beat. And sometimes when the house is completely quiet, I swear I can hear the faint whirring of gears where her heart should be. Story 17. The Birthday Party. I never thought a birthday invitation could be so terrifying, but what happened last week still sends chills down my spine. You see, my son Tommy came running into the kitchen, waving a bright red envelope with excitement. "Look, Mom, I got invited to a birthday party," he exclaimed. The invitation was beautifully crafted, with golden letters and intricate designs, but something felt off. The return address was for the old Victorian house next door, number 42 Maple Street. That's when my blood ran cold. That house had been abandoned for over 20 years. I tried to explain to Tommy that there must be some mistake. The house was empty, had been since before he was born, but he was insistent, showing me the invitation with his name perfectly written in elegant cursive. The party was scheduled for that very afternoon at 4 p.m. My husband Mark and I debated what to do. Maybe some new neighbors had moved in without us noticing. But we hadn't seen any moving trucks, no signs of life. Still, to put Tommy's mind at ease, we decided to walk over and check. The closer we got to the house, the more the air seemed to thicken. The paint was peeling, windows were grimy, and dead leaves carpeted the porch. Through a broken window, we could see inside, and what we saw, I'll never forget it. In what must have been the dining room, there was a long table set for 12. But this wasn't a normal party setup. The tablecloth was gray with decades of dust. Plates were filled with what looked like rotting food, and dead flowers sat in cracked vases. And there, in the center of the table, was a birthday cake. Not just any cake, it was covered in what looked like black icing, moving, writhing. As we got closer, we realized with horror that it wasn't icing at all. It was a mass of maggots spelling out one word: Tommy. We grabbed our son and ran home, called the police, but when they investigated, the table was empty. Clean, like nothing had ever been there. To this day, we keep our curtains closed on that side of the house. And whenever Tommy gets an invitation now, we check the address very, very carefully. Some birthday invitations, it seems, are better left unanswered. And some parties aren't meant for the living. Story 18. The Swapped Voices. Have you ever stopped to think about the sounds you make? The way your laugh bubbles up from your chest, or how your voice carries its own unique signature? I never did, until that night. I live in apartment 23B, and my neighbor, Ms. Carter, lives in 23A. We've never been close, just occasional nods in the hallway and muffled sounds through our shared wall. But that night, everything changed. It was around 2 a.m. when I heard it, a blood-curdling scream that made my skin crawl. It was coming from Ms. Carter's apartment, and it was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. The kind of scream that makes your heart stop and your breath catch in your throat. I immediately called 911. My hands were shaking as I dialed, and I could hear my own voice trembling as I tried to explain the situation to the dispatcher. But when the police arrived and Ms. Carter opened her door, she seemed perfectly fine. Confused even, she insisted she'd been sleeping soundly. The police left and I felt foolish. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the stress of work was finally getting to me. I apologized to Ms. Carter and went back to my apartment. That's when things got strange. I was making tea to calm my nerves, humming to myself, when I noticed something off about my voice. It sounded different, higher, softer, with a slight rasp I'd never had before. I tried clearing my throat, but it didn't help. Then I heard it, my old voice, my real voice coming through the wall from Ms. Carter's apartment. She was talking on the phone, but with my voice. I pressed my ear against the wall, confused and terrified. That's when I heard the whisper so close it could have been inside my head. You took my screams. Now I have yours. The teacup slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor. I wanted to scream, but the sound that came out wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. And somewhere in apartment 23A, my own voice was laughing. They say we take things for granted until they're gone. I never thought my voice would be one of those things. Now every time I speak, I'm reminded of that night. And sometimes late at night, I hear my old voice through the wall screaming in a way I never could. Be careful what you hear in the dark. Some sounds aren't meant to be witnessed, and some voices aren't meant to be traded. Story 19. The House That Breathed. I never wanted to live alone. Not really, but after Sarah left, I didn't have much choice. The real estate market was brutal, and this old Victorian on Maple Street was the only place I could afford. Sure, it needed work, a lot of work, but it had character. That's what I told myself anyway. The day I moved in, my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Chen, watched me from her porch. Her eyes never left me as I carried box after box inside. Just before sunset, she finally approached, her small frame casting a long shadow across my new lawn. "Young man," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "there's something you need to know about this house." She glanced nervously at my windows. Don't let the house know you're alone." I laughed it off, of course. What else could I do? Old houses have their quirks, their settling noises, their creaks and groans. I'd gotten used to strange sounds in my apartment downtown. This wouldn't be any different. That first night, I lay in bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore the unfamiliar shadows in my room. That's when I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound, like breathing, but not human breathing. This was deeper, slower, more deliberate. I told myself it was the wind, but there was no breeze that night. The sound grew louder, and then I saw it, the walls. They were moving, expanding and contracting like giant lungs. The wallpaper rippled with each breath. I ran to the door, my heart pounding. That's when Mrs. Chen started banging frantically on my front door. Her voice was hysterical. "It's too late. It's too late. It thinks you're its new heart." The house seemed to shudder at her words, and then, oh God. Then the ceiling began to weep. Thick, warm droplets fell on my face. I touched one, brought my fingers to my nose. The metallic smell was unmistakable. It was blood. The house was crying blood. They say houses absorb the energy of those who live in them. But what happens when a house decides it doesn't want to just absorb energy anymore? What happens when it wants to absorb you completely? I'm still here in this house. I can't leave now, it won't let me. Sometimes, late at night, I feel my own heartbeat synchronizing with its pulse. And I wonder, how long before I become just another part of its architecture, another heart beating within its walls? Don't let the house know you're alone. But maybe it's not about being alone at all. Maybe it's about the house making sure you'll never be alone again. Story 20. The Final Neighbor. Everything looked normal at first. The worn carpets, flickering hallway lights, the usual city symphony of sirens and street noise floating through thin walls. I'd been living here for about 6 months when I realized something strange about Unit 13. In all that time, I'd never once seen anyone go in or out. No grocery deliveries, no mail pickup, nothing. Just that weathered door with its brass numbers almost mocking me every time I passed by. The other tenants, they came and went like clockwork. Mrs. Peterson from Unit 4 with her yapping chihuahua, the college kids in Unit 7 stumbling home late on weekends, even Mr. Roberts from Unit 10 with his endless stream of takeout orders. But Unit 13 silent, always silent. I tried asking the building manager about it once. He just gave me this odd look and changed the subject. That's when the curiosity really started eating at me. Last night, I finally worked up the courage to do something about it. I wrote a simple note. "Hi neighbor, just wanted to say hello. I'm in Unit 8, nothing threatening, nothing weird, just friendly." I slipped it under the door around midnight. This morning my heart nearly stopped. There, taped to my own door, was my note. But below my message, in spidery handwriting that seemed to shift as I looked at it, were words I can't get out of my head. "You're the last tenant. When you move out, we all disappear." I thought it was some kind of sick joke. But then tonight everything changed. One by one, the lights in every apartment went dark. No more barking from Unit 4. No music from Unit 7. No delivery guys calling Unit 10. Now I'm sitting here, in the darkness of my apartment, staring out my window at the city lights. The entire building is pitch black except for one window. Unit 13 glows with an impossible light, and sometimes I swear I can see shadows moving behind those curtains. Shadows that don't look quite human. I've started packing my things, but I can't help wondering what happens when I leave. What happens when the last tenant finally moves out? Maybe some questions are better left unanswered. Want even darker? I can dive into BooTube tales of killer neighbor conspiracies. Let me know which ones messed with your head the most. Or if you want the real-life inspirations behind these,